Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. The very first sentence of Simone de Beauvoir's conclusion to her Ethics of Ambiguity is this kind of ethics individualistic or not? And, as so often with a philosopher, when they ask a question like that, the answer is not an unequivocal yes, no. It'll usually be, well, yes in these respects, no in these respects. And so the question is not whether it is simply individualistic. It's going to be, well, what do we mean by individualistic? And then we can say yes or no. And so she's going to begin by saying that it is individualistic in that it accords the individual an absolute value. You might say, okay, well, that solves the problem. That's the very definition of individualistic. But if you consider the spectrum of individualistic ethics that are available out there, we see that the kind of existentialism that she has been presenting in the work is going to actually be incompatible with a number of different conceptions of the individual and how to make the individual have absolute value. So it's not going to be compatible with some, essentially egoistic doctrine that says every single individual is the thing that matters the most, really just to that individual, but should matter the most to them and screw everybody else. That's not going to be compatible with what she has been unpacking in the entire thing. So the question then is this absolute value and according it, how? How does existentialism do that? So she's going to begin by saying that it recognizes in the individual a power of laying the foundations for their own existence. Now notice what she doesn't say, laying the foundations for existence as such, right? Their own existence. Now it will affect other people's existence as well, but it's not as if any single one of us is the central node around which the entire universe rotates. Later she's going to talk about solipsism. That would be an extreme variety of that. And here she's going to say, this is not that radically new. She says it's individualistic in the sense in which the wisdom of the ancients, the Christian ethics of salvation, and the Kantian ideal of virtue also merit this name. So she's already invoked this trio, let's call them. And interestingly, what does she mean by the wisdom of the ancients? She actually earlier talked about those three, but specified the ancients as the Epicureans and their understanding of friendship and the accord that it gives to the other person as being valuable for you, right? So it's not something that's just emerging out of the blue, a complete rejection of all previous ethics. And she also says it's opposed to the totalitarian doctrines which raise up beyond man the mirage of mankind. She spent a lot of discussion in the earlier parts talking about the sacrifice of the individual, indeed many individuals, for some lofty, far-off goal of, realized humanity or the perfect state, or pick whatever else you want. There's many varieties of totalizing doctrines that will substitute a mirage, an imaginary thing, for real people. So it is individualistic in that it's saying individuals matter. They have value. We shouldn't trample over them. How is it not individualistic? Well, there's different conceptions of individualism. She says it's not solipsistic, so we should dwell on that for a moment for two reasons. One is you might not know what solipsism is, and the second is that it might not be the best chosen word, in part because when you do know what it is, you're like, well, there's other ways this could be happening that aren't strictly solipsism. So solipsism is an extreme philosophical doctrine that holds that just the subject is real, and it's just the one who's doing the philosophizing. I'm the only real being in the universe. Everything else is maybe characters in a story that I'm inhabiting, or NPCs in a game, or pick whatever else you want, figments of my imagination, right? Characters in a play that I'm writing without realizing it, where I'm the author. So solipsism is actually kind of rare. And really what she's meaning by this are viewpoints which, much more commonly give oneself an absolute value, but don't accord that absolute value to others, just view others as instruments for one's own will or desire or plans or things like that. And so she's going to say, the individual is defined by his relationship to the world, and the world includes other individuals, right? So to actually be an individualist, you can't be the only individual. He exists only by transcending himself, and his freedom can be achieved only through the freedom of others. So, in addition to solipsism, we might talk about narcissism, we might talk about people being tyrannical, all sorts of other variants on that. Then she goes on and she says, it also doesn't lead to the anarchy of personal whim. This is kind of important because there are conceptions of existentialism that other people have proposed where everything really does boil down just to individual whim, caprice. You don't have a reason for what it is that you choose because no reason could possibly be a real one. She's rejecting that. She's saying that is just sort of an anarchism and not the good kind, we might say. I mean, she's not really an anarchist. So she says the human being is free, but they find their law in this very freedom. So what does that mean? Well, she spells it out. First, they must assume that freedom and not flee it. He assumes it by a constructive movement. One does not exist without doing something, and also by a negative movement which rejects oppression for oneself and for others. And both of these, she says, in construction as in rejection, it's reconquering freedom on the contingent facticity of existence. So that's a fancy term for what she says. Taking the given, which is there without any reason, as something willed by the human being. And she says, we're never finished with this, but, we have to keep going with it. So it's not individualistic in that it's, prioritizes one individual over all others, maybe even doesn't treat others as individuals, and doesn't just simply, base itself on whims and willing that doesn't have any ground to it. The human being, if they're actually following through on their freedom, they find themselves having to constrain their own freedom, right? So then she raises an interesting question. Isn't this, the constant effort, battle without victory, pure gullibility? Gullibility is believing in something and being a sucker because it's not real. She says, it will be argued this is only a ruse of transcendence projecting before itself a goal which constantly recedes, running after itself on an endless treadmill. To exist for mankind is to remain where one is, and it fools itself by calling this progress. Our whole ethics does nothing but encourage it in this lying enterprise, since we're asking each person, to confirm existence as a value for all others. And she says, isn't it simply a matter of organizing among human beings a complicity which allows them to substitute a game of illusions for the given world? This is an accusation that could be made against existentialists. If we all were existentialists, we bought into this doctrine, wouldn't we all just be lying to ourselves, right? Maybe life doesn't have any meaning, maybe it should have a transcendent meaning, but this in-between of us having to discover it and affirm it, that's not really where it's at. So her response to this is to point out, we've already attempted to answer this objection. You can formulate it only by placing yourself on the grounds of an inhuman and consequently false objectivity. Within mankind, men may be fooled. The word lie has a meaning by opposition to the truth established by men themselves, but humanity cannot fool itself completely because it is humanity which creates the criteria of true and false. Right? So she says, let human beings attach value to a whole bunch of different matters, to words, forms, colors, mathematical theorems, physical laws, and athletic prowess. The athletic prowess is kind of an interesting one to throw in there because before it's all aesthetic and, physical things. And then she says, let them accord value to one another in love and friendship. That's different. Assigning and according or attaching things or matters, and then other individual human beings, individualities. She says, the men immediately have this value, and they have it absolutely. And it's possible, she says, that a person could refuse to love anything on earth. They'll prove it and carry it out by suicide. But if they live, the reason is, whatever they may say, there's still some attachment to existence. His life will be commensurate with this attachment. It will justify itself to the extent it genuinely justifies the world. So we're not engaged in a ruse of transcendence, and each individual gets to decide what is going to matter for them. And this is going to lead us into a discussion of finiteness, right? She says that this justification, though open on the entire universe through time and space, will always be finite. Whatever one may do, one never realizes anything but a limited work, like existence itself, which tries to establish itself through that work and which death also limits. So individualistic in this sense means embracing, or at least acknowledging, the finitude of every individual. Every individual is, in a certain sense, an absolute, but it's a limited absolute. It's not solipsism, right? So she also talks here about the brief consolation that can be provided by thinking about things in terms of the system with a capital S. And she gives her own example. She says, as soon as one considers the system abstractly and theoretically, one puts oneself in effect on the plane of the universal, thus of the infinite. That's why reading the Hegelian system is so comforting. I remember having experienced a great feeling of calm on reading Hegel in the impersonal framework of the Bibliothèque Nationale in August 1940. So, when World War II is going on and the French are now, occupied. Once I got into the street again, into my life, my individual life, out of the system, beneath a real sky, the system was no longer of any use to me. What it had offered me under a show of the infinite was the consolations of death, and I wanted to live in the midst of living men. I wanted to live just by myself in the midst of other people. I think that inversely, she says, existentialism does not offer to the reader the consolations of an abstract evasion. Its ethics is experienced in the truth of life, and then appears as the only proposition of salvation which one can address to human beings, right? And she says, we are absolutely free today if we choose to will our existence in its finiteness, a finiteness that opens up to the infinite. And what makes this a little bit more concrete? So here's where she's going to bring this to a close. She's going to tell us any person who's known real loves, real revolts, real desires, and real will knows quite well he has no need of any outside guarantee to be sure of his goals. Their certitude comes from his own drive, right? And she says that the result is not external to the good will, which fulfills itself in aiming at it. If it came to be that each person did what they must, existence would be saved in each one without there being any need of dreaming of a paradise where all would be reconciled in death in some sort of system where everybody has their place. Existence is going to be a jostling of individualities with each other that encounter each other in freedom. And so this is the kind of individualism that the brand of existentialism Simone de Beauvoir is presenting us with. It can, not just fully accept, but make integral to its ethics.